Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm wondering, has there ever been a player in fantasy football that you were actually scared? I mean, legitimately afraid to draft? Chris, I know there's some players that have risk, but have you ever had that feeling on draft day that you actually are afraid to pull the trigger?
Yeah, every time I click draft on a player who plays for Arthur Smith.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But look, sometimes there are players that your league mates just don't want to touch. There's too much risk. That doesn't mean that you can't do it because sometimes the upside is worth the risk. So we're going to talk about some players that you should be targeting. Your league mates won't. Let's start number one with you.
My number one is Tee Higgins, who we haven't really talked much about this offseason, and a lot of people haven't talked much about this offseason because after last year, they're pretty scared to draft Tee Higgins. Look, this is a guy who had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, almost had 1,000 yards as a rookie. Then last year, of course, missed 5 games, and Joe Burrow missed most of the season. So not a great season for Tee Higgins. And then this offseason had the contract issue. Well, I guess it wasn't a contract issue. He got franchise tagged, and there was thoughts maybe he's not going to play under the franchise tag. But that's all water under the bridge now. He's playing under the franchise tag. And now the wide receiver who is actually in a contract dispute is Jamar Chase. At this point, it doesn't sound like Chase and the Bengals are close to any kind of a deal. Now, I don't think Jamar Chase is going to hold out if there's not a contract by the start of the season, but it is a possibility. But also a possibility here is that Jamar Chase doesn't return to the team, or at least practice with the team, until very late in the preseason. That means he could get off to a slow start. There's always the risk for an acclimation injury, right? Going from not practicing to full game speed is a risk that you could get injured early in the season. But even if Jamar Chase is out there week one, I still really like Tee Higgins this year. And with the departure of Joe Mixon and Tyler Boyd, the Bengals now have the fourth most vacated targets going into the season. It used to be Tyler Boyd was the clear number 3 here. Now it's kind of up in the air who the number 3 will be. Will it be rookie Jermaine Burton? Will it be Andres Iosivas, who they drafted last year? I probably butchered his name. My bad, but I'm bad with names. But the point is, I think Tee Higgins is going to slot in as the clear number 2. He's going to see more targets than he has in years past because there's not really that, dependable number 3 behind him. And also, let's not forget, he's basically on a contract year because he's playing under the franchise tag. He's going to be slightly more motivated to be out there putting up a great season to put his best foot forward for potential suitors next year when he probably becomes a free agent. So I think Tee Higgins, this is a guy who the first 3 years of his career was on the kind of trajectory you want to see from a potential stud wide receiver. I think 2024 is the year where it all pays off, and we see the best season ever from Tee Higgins, and your league mates are terrified to draft him because of last year and because of the fact that, this Bengals offense, it feels like is kind of underachieved for a couple years now. But Tee Higgins, a great value in your fantasy drafts. Don't be scared to take him.
Well, funny, I'd have to admit, early this offseason, I was a little scared to get Tee Higgins, and now it seems like the contract issue, it's not him, it's Chase. So, gotta adjust our thinking a little bit. Now, you also did mention Arthur Smith up front. We don't have to be scared of him anymore, at least not in Atlanta. And I know that people don't want to get the rug pulled out from under them again by Kyle Pitts, because after his actually really good rookie season, I know he only scored 1 touchdown, but he was really good as a very young rookie. But let's face it, he has not lived up to the billing, his draft slot, his hype, everything, right? It's been very disappointing. But there are reasons, and they don't just involve Art Smith. It also is that he wasn't fully healthy at all last year. In the offseason, we could tell he just wasn't the same guy, didn't have that explosiveness, right? The cutting just wasn't there. And we found out later that the knee issue was worse than we originally had been led on to believe. So there are multiple reasons why Pitts did underperform. And of course, a big part of that was the quarterback situation. We've already been through that. Desmond Ritter's gone. Taylor Heineke's gone. Smith is gone. And Kirk Cousins definitely knows how to throw the ball a lot, and he will do that. And a new coaching staff. And Pitts is healthy. And he's still probably the most talented physically at the tight end position that there is. That's right. He still has the upside to be the tight end 1. Now, I'm not going to go out and say he is going to be the tight end 1 because there are a lot of other good tight ends who could do that, but he's not being even drafted as a top 5 tight end. right? He was what, usually number 6 or 7 off the board, depending on your league. Why not take the chance on him? Because we act like these guys who are being drafted at the top of the tight end position, like they're slam dunks, as if Sam Laporta didn't go undrafted last year. Trey McBride, undrafted last year. We see it all the time. The guys who finish near the top of the tight end position aren't the ones you draft first. Okay, these guys are not just locks to lead the way at the tight end position. Mark Andrews is always getting hurt. George Kittle has had a lot of injuries too. Look, Kyle Pitts is definitely worth it. I know you feel like you just don't want to get suckered again, and that's fine because you don't have to pay the same price that you've been paying year after year. It seems so obvious this year that he's got finally everything in place to take off. So don't be scared. And again, it's just tight end. You could always stream if worse comes to worse. Now, I can't believe you're going to say that people might be scared of the number 2 overall draft pick.
Well, they must be because right now Jaden Daniels is currently going as the QB 13 on ESPN, the QB 11 on Yahoo, and the QB 16 on Sleeper. That means barely a QB 1, and in 2 of those leagues, not even being drafted in 1 QB leagues. And I think the thing that scares people here is the injury risk of a rushing quarterback who's not a big quarterback. I mean, we've seen it in recent years. We saw Anthony Richardson last year get hurt. We've seen Lamar Jackson be banged up. And look, sure, those rushing quarterbacks, they certainly have more risk, but they also have more upside, and upside wins championships. Any player at any position has injury risk. But here's what I love about Jaden Daniels this year and why, for me, if I'm completely punting QB, he's at the top of my list for the guys I take. When you look at him so far this preseason, and I know it's just preseason, you don't want to overreact, but there's 2 things I love about what I'm seeing about Jaden Daniels. Number 1, he's shown poise in the pocket, that pocket presence that I was somewhat worried about. And number 2, he's shown great accuracy on his throws. This is a guy who in college last year had a 72% completion percentage. Also, 1,100 rushing yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. So we're talking about an accurate QB with that rushing upside. Also, what I love that I've seen this preseason is this Washington offense. Under new OC Cliff Kingsbury, the Commanders are running the fastest pace of any team in the NFL, and they're having Jaden Daniels get the ball out quick. Right now, his average time to throw is under 2 seconds. Kingsbury understands this offensive line isn't great. Jaden Daniels just get the ball out quick with those precision passes to go with that rushing upside. Jaden Daniels could truly be one of the best fantasy quarterbacks this year. And when you look at the other quarterbacks that go kind of in this range, guys like Brock Purdy, Tua, Kirk Cousins, I'm not against those guys. I think they're fine, but they don't have the upside of Jaden Daniels. So sure, Jaden Daniels does have more risk as a running quarterback, but he also has significantly more upside, and that's the kind of risk you need to take in fantasy football. Let your league mates be scared to draft him, worried that he might get hurt early in the season like Anthony Richardson last year, because if he doesn't, you're going to be happy he's on your fantasy team. Do you want to win your fantasy league but don't have time to do all the research? Are you tired of drafting mediocre teams and then having to constantly hope you hit it big on the waiver wire just to compete? Do you wish you could have a fantasy expert like Pierre or myself with you while you draft? Well, now you can. With our app Draft Lane and our live draft pilot, we will guide you through every pick of your draft and tell you exactly which players we would pick if we were on the clock. Our proprietary algorithm will take into account your league settings, scoring, and roster requirements to identify the best picks every time you are on the clock to ensure you have a winning team from week 1. It's the closest thing you can get to having us there drafting with you. Get the biggest edge in fantasy football. Just go to your app store and search for Draft Lane and download it today and get ready to dominate your draft.
Well, it's true that nothing scares people in a draft more than injuries, and not just injury risk, but players who are already injured in the preseason, and that's why Hollywood Brown is already seeing his ADP dip quite a bit. And it's funny how we've seen this flip. Rashee Rice was available a lot later early in the offseason, especially talking about your best ball drafts. And now all of a sudden he's back up to where he was before, which is too early in my opinion. But as far as Hollywood Brown, now all of a sudden we're going to see him fall and fall because, yes, he is hurt. But here's the thing. He's not out for the season. He's not getting put on IR. He'll miss a game, 2 games. It's not going to be that much. It's going to be the beginning of the season where you really shouldn't need a whole bunch of help yet, right? You should have somebody on your bench that you just drafted that you feel comfortable starting, and the upside is still there. So I also am not too worried because this is not something that has to do with his legs, foot, ankle. This is an upper body injury. He should recover just fine from it. Doesn't sound like it's that serious, but you know what people do. They panic. They're like, I don't want to take on the risk. People get scared. And sometimes, like, that is definitely a good strategy. You don't want to actively seek out players who are injured, but it depends on the player, depends on the injury, depends on a lot of things. And like I said, this is not an injury I'm particularly worried about. And I still see the fact that this could be the number one receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs catching passes from Pat Mahomes. Don't need to explain why that's a favorable situation. Like, Hollywood has already impressed. Remember, Mahomes made that quote way back when he first started working with Hollywood. He said, I didn't know that this guy could do everything. Meaning he thought that he was really just a deep threat because that's how he was used a lot in Baltimore and sometimes in Arizona. But he's now realizing this is a legit number one receiver. Rashee Rice was the number one receiver last year, Kansas City, kind of by default, because if you remember that the rest of that receiving group was massively disappointed, which is why half of them are not even there anymore or won't make the cut this year. Hollywood is going to be the number one receiver. Rashee Rice is somebody who works great against zone coverage, those underneath routes, but he doesn't have that downfield threat ability like Hollywood, and Hollywood really can do a little bit of everything. So I'm still buying in on him, and now that I can get him basically later than the other two Chiefs receivers, meaning Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice, yeah, I'm all in on him, even more so than I was before the injury. And we talk about injury prone wide receivers. There's one name that immediately comes to mind.
Yeah, Christian Watson's got to be the poster boy for terrifying draft picks at this point, right? He's only played 23 of a possible 34 games in his career so far. He has somehow in 2 seasons had 3 hamstring strains. That doesn't even seem possible. So I totally get it when, Christian Watson is there and you're ready to click draft if you're shaking a little bit, terrified to pick him. But you got to look at the potential upside here if he can stay healthy. Now, he has worked on it this offseason, right? He's tried to balance out this hamstring thing. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But I will say one thing so far, I haven't heard anything about Christian Watson leaving practice, limping off the field. So at least so far, that's a good sign. I know it's still early, but at least there's that so far. But you look at Christian Watson, what he can do if he's healthy. Last year, despite only playing 9 games, he was third on the Packers in red zone targets. He only had 1 less target than Jaden Reed and only 4 less targets than Romeo Doubs. This is a guy, when they get into the red zone, has a chance to catch a touchdown almost every time. They're always looking for this guy in the red zone. Also, he had the 6th highest average depth of target among wide receivers last year. So not only does he give you that touchdown upside every week, he gives you that huge play upside every single week. This is a wide receiver that can legit, not even hyperbolic here, he can legit win you fantasy weeks by himself if he's healthy and on the field. And that's the big thing here. But look, like I said, you have to buy into the upside. You have to take the risk. And this year, the risk isn't even that great. Remember last year, he was like a 3rd, 4th round pick, where the risk was high. Now you can routinely get him 7th round and later, depending on which site you're on. So the risk isn't even that great for Christian Watson anymore. So look, maybe he's just going to go down the road of these players who just, their bodies just never allowed them to be the player they could possibly be. But if that doesn't happen, if this work on balancing out the hamstrings actually does pay off, Christian Watson could legit be a league-winning wide receiver where he's being drafted. So it's scary to draft him. I totally understand that, but I think the reward is well worth the risk.
And now this last one, I don't really understand. I'm going to talk about a running back that really should be treated as an RB1. But for some reason, James Cook, I feel like has a lot of doubters and a lot of haters. And I really don't get it. So first of all, this is a running back who last year finished 4th in the NFL in rushing yards. He averaged 4.7 yards per carry. For his career, 2 years worth, he averages 5 yards per carry. He's a really good runner, and he's a really good receiver out of the backfield. So why is it he's not even being drafted as a top 10, sometimes even top 12 running back in some drafts? I don't know. I honestly, I'm trying to figure out why people doubt on him, but I think I know what it is because they're worried that the fantasy production isn't there because the lack of touchdowns. You look at fantasy points, you always feel like, well, maybe he's wanting a little bit for the fact that he doesn't give you those big games because he really does not score many touchdowns on the ground. In fact, only 2 rushing touchdowns last year. He did have 4 in the air, but still, I just feel like that's missing, and people will point and say Josh Allen's always going to be their leading rusher, especially when you talk about the red zone and near the goal line. That's a fact. I can't deny that. This is true. In fact, last year, as far as red zone rushing, Josh Allen was the leader for the Buffalo Bills, 35 red zone rush attempts. James Cook had 33. And then Latavius Murray, not too far behind, with 20. Well, here's the thing. I understand that Josh Allen is still there, but why is it we just automatically assume that running backs in similar situations are going to be so much more valuable? Like Derrick Henry, look, I love Derrick Henry. I don't worry at all about him not scoring touchdowns just because he's going to Baltimore. They have Lamar Jackson there. Is that scaring anybody off of Derrick Henry? No. Jonathan Taylor, who's first or second round pick in a lot of leagues, he's got Anthony Richardson. Does that scare people off of him? Not at all. Saquon Barkley's got Jalen Hurts, the guy who scores the most goal line touchdowns out of any quarterback. And yet, he's also a very early pick as far as running backs go. And yet, some people will hold that same thing against James Cook. Well, he's never going to score touchdowns. This is a different offense, different offensive coordinator for the second half of last year. They did not really bring in anybody who will threaten James Cook's workload. Ray Davis is fine. He's going to be the backup. That's about all I can say, right? He's fine. He's not a big goal line back. I think James Cook sees more action now as a runner, but also I just like the fact that he's going to be more involved overall because they lost Stephon Diggs. They're going to need to rely on the running game more. That's really what Sean McDermott wants. I mean, James Cook may not be the RB1 this year, but he will be an RB1. I know that for sure. And some people are treating him like they're just not that interested. Don't be scared to draft those players just because your league mates might be. And there's also some players that are getting ignored by the competition. These are guys we think are must haves. Your league mates don't agree.